Thank you for joining me for Week 3 of the Time Bubble interview series. I'm your host, EJ Borkert. For those unfamiliar with the show, this is a segment that is going to appear each Saturday on my blog, where I will pick a character from this past week's chapter to interview. I'm going to be pulling these characters from a specific part of the story to talk with them about what they're thinking and feeling about what's going on in the story. Don't worry, they won't remember any of this ever happening, so this won't have any effect on the story. They will be returned to the very moment I borrowed them from, so their absence won't be noticed. This week, I asked Lieutenant Jacob from the Super Morpher to join me to discuss the events that have taken place in LaForne lately. Thank you for joining me today, Lieutenant.
It's a pleasure. And call me Derek, please.
Very well, Derek. I understand that the police force has just gone through a bit of difficulty.
That's a bit of an understatement. Last night was the biggest trial that the force has ever faced, and God willing, the biggest we'll ever have to face.
Let's hope so. Can you tell me a bit about what you were feeling over the course of the night?
Well, at the beginning of the night, I was uncertain if I had been a victim of a prank or if I was going to see the next day. It was a very nerve-wracking experience.
I'm sure that it was. What made you decide to trust the Super Morpher's warning? You haven't exactly been a fan of his in the past.
I won't deny I was suspicious of him. Can you blame me? People with powers like what he has have to be held accountable. They're allowed to run wild. After a while, they start to realize just how much more power they have than people like me and you. Pretty soon, you have a near unstoppable villain run rampart in your city. The Super Morpher really didn't have any reason to lie to me about the attack on the city, though. What would he gain? If the police were out in force, any major crimes that he had planned would likely be thwarted, and at worst, he made us look silly and very tired.
So, other than the possibility of a few laughs, he had no real reason to draw the entire police force out. I suppose that's the kind of logical thinking that lets a man like you make it to the rank of lieutenant. Let's move a little deeper into the night. What were your thoughts when the gangs first started to appear?
They appeared like phantoms out of the darkness. The torches that they were carrying casting eerie shadows on the walls of the building. There were so many of them, and we didn't have more than 4 or 5 officers in any one area. It's a big city, and we didn't know where they were going to be attacking from. We weren't even armed with real bullets. We had been issued rubber bullets to try and prevent as many casualties as we could, but the gangs didn't share our sentiment. They were armed with grenades, Molotov cocktails, and real bullets.
And you managed to stay strong and do your duty even in the face of such overwhelming odds. You and your officers are brave men and women, and the city should feel honored to have you protecting the city.
Thank you.
I think the next major development of the fight for you was when that Molotov cocktail started that building behind you on fire. Can you describe your feelings when that happened?
Things started to seem pretty hopeless around then. I'd heard reports of other fires from across the city, and I'd heard the firefighters saying that the gangs weren't allowing them to get close enough to deal with them. It really seemed like, despite our best efforts, despite being in the right places to deal with this problem, it wasn't enough. The city was going to suffer major destruction at the very least, and possibly be completely destroyed. I feel like we failed the city, and the Super Morpher was to blame for not keeping his promise of backing us up.
I was wondering when you were going to mention him again. Did your attitude about him change once you showed up and saved the lives of you and your officers?
What can I say? He showed up exactly when we needed him and threw himself onto the grenade without thinking about his own safety. I saw firsthand that he wasn't immortal last night. He may have survived that grenade blast, but it severely weakened him. Even though he seemed as weak as a newborn, he still managed to put the fire out somehow, and took the beating from those gang members. It gave me a new respect for him.
So, is it safe to say you've changed your opinion of the Super Morpher?
I'll admit that I respect the guy, and that I think he has good intentions for the city, but he still needs to be watched and kept accountable. I wouldn't be opposed to working with him again in the future, however.
I'm sure that you will be given an opportunity to do just that very soon.
What do you mean by that? What do you know that you aren't telling me, or your readers for that matter?
I'm afraid that I'm not at liberty to say at the moment, but I promise that you will find out soon enough. We've run out of time for this interview, but I wanted to thank Lieutenant Derek Jacob for being my guest today. I hope that today's interview gave you a little more insight into Lieutenant Jacob and the world of the Super Morpher, and that you will join me next week for a very special interview with a character from Beast Blaze. Look for more Time Bubble interviews to come in the future, and if you have a character that you would like me to interview from Beast Blaze, leave it in a comment down below. Lieutenant Jacob, if you will follow these fine gentlemen, they'll make sure that you get back to your story.
The Time Bubble interviews have been brought to you by and paid for by Godard Labs.